Hello and welcome to another episode of Reflections GH. This is the beginning of our 4-part education series, and today my co-host and I are excited to chat with 3 guests who have all attained and their spots in this conversation. Before I introduce our guests, a little background to today's episode. So in March, we heard news of a Rastafarian student, or several of them, who were not allowed to enroll at a Chimota school after previously being admitted. The school insisted one of them cut off his dreadlocks because it was in violation of school policy. The debates that followed spared a crucial national conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in Ghana's educational system. We have also recently heard about Wesley Girls High School's decision not to allow a Muslim student to fast. We therefore decided to contribute to this debate by inviting our distinguished guests, all of whom have professional expertise in this discussion. So without wasting much time, I want to introduce our guests for today in no particular order. We have Nikoi. Ni is an African scholar. He studies African popular culture. He's interested in how meaning-making practices inherently relate to broader questions of power amongst axes of social difference and hierarchy. So race, ethnicity, class, gender, sexuality, nationality, and language. Next, we have Elizabeth B Mensah. And is Elizabeth back with us? I know she was here, but she'll be back. Elizabeth Boatma Mensah is an educator with a passion in youth development. She holds a certificate in education from Ola College of Education in Cape Coast. She also has a bachelor's degree in education and a Master of Arts degree in Peace and Development Studies from the University of Cape Coast. Elizabeth has been a teacher for the past 10 years. In addition to her former work at Agri Memorial Senior High School, she also deals in natural skin care products in the name of it's a Honampa range of products. Sorry. And finally, but not the least, we have Daniel Usu-Trekon. Daniel Usu-Trekon is a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Edinburgh, where he teaches comparative education and international development. His research is in education of migration and consists of 3 interlinked strands. First, identities and integration. Second, schooling and inclusion. And third, multiculturalism in Ghana and West Africa. So just from the bios, the very short bios, we do have a very strong contingent of guests, and we are so excited. Thank you so much, all of you, for agreeing to join us. Thank you for agreeing to be a part of this conversation. And without wasting too much time, I want us to jump straight into the conversation with our first discussion question here. And I want us to have the background of all of that stuff that has happened in the last, month, almost 2 months now. And I want to ask, what are the perspectives that inform issues of inclusion and marginalization in Ghana's schools? Who or what decides who is in and who is out? When we think about these issues of inclusion and marginalization, which of course have these very important implications for the conversation about diversity. Where do people come from in terms of viewpoints or perspectives about inclusion and marginalization in Ghana? Anyone can jump in, otherwise I'll point you out and you can go ahead. You want to start, Nee?
I knew you were going to pick on me. Okay. I think when we talk about marginalization and questions of inclusion, I think there's an interesting paradox about how Ghana is so rich in cultural diversity, but at the same time, it kind of ignores how difference also shapes our experiences of navigating Ghana as Ghanaians. And so, for example, people believe that there's no discrimination in Ghana. Right. There are people who walk around and think ethnic discrimination, ethnic bigotry, and the way it kind of shapes our experiences doesn't exist. Same along religious lines. And I think there's a resistance to really acknowledge how difference and power kind of intersect and subordinate particular groups, and gender as well, right? And also questions of sexuality, how all those are intertwined to create relations of domination and subordination. I think to recognize that is where where there's a lot of a challenge, right? It's not a problem, right? And so, for example, I remember when the issue of the discrimination against the Rastafarian students and also against Muslim students as well. I remember when the discussion was going on, people said, well, the rules are the rules. People should obey the rules. There's nothing going on. There's nothing wrong per se. And that's I think the failure to recognize that our differences actually in the way it operates in Ghana create these kind of hierarchical relationships is what I think is missing in the way we kind of interrogate these questions, right? From a kind of like a general sort of public conversation sort of approach, right? We don't recognize the problem, right? It's something we wish away, right? Our differences shouldn't kind of interfere in this production of Ghanaianness, right? And I think that kind of ideology is what kind of refuses to go away and kind of hinders us from seeing what the problems are.
So our if I get you correctly, our tendency to want sameness, right? Our tendency to want to be the same so bad that we try to we see them, but we don't acknowledge that these differences exist and these differences should, right, exist. So Daniel, I want to come to you before we move on. What your initial thoughts are, not necessarily related to what Nee said, but what your initial thoughts about the original question, where people's, or in general, maybe collectively, what are the perspectives that are informing our stances on inclusion and so on?
Okay, thanks for having me on this show. And I think when it comes to perspectives, there are many. I think we cannot exhaust them. Nee has eloquently, named some. But so there are many players within the education field. There are many stakeholders. You have the government, you have educationists, you have the policymakers, you have the society, you have religious bodies and others. And all these people look at it from different perspectives. So in terms of what has shaped or framed the discussion, so from a policy perspective, you realize that, so I picked some education politics at the global level. So in terms of the global level, either to education for special needs is when we talk about issues of inclusion and marginalization. So the discussion was about whether to place them in regular classrooms or to place them in normal special schools. But with time, the discussion has moved from issues of access, so that's access, whether to placement in special or regular schools, to where we put, catering for all learner diversity. So we've moved from placement issues of access. So if you see that in the Ghanaian terrain, we're still discussing issues of access, then we are still a bit behind in terms of the global picture. Even in recent times, we've gone from catering for all learner diversities to look at issues of equity. So now we don't talk about even inclusion, we talk about inclusion and equity within the education politics at the global level, where the idea is every learner matters and matters equally. So whether you are in the minority or you are in the majority, so whether you are Rastafarian, whether you are a Christian, whether you're an atheist, every learner matters and matters equally. In all this, scholars argue that regardless of whether we are talking about issues of equity, issues of inclusion, these things need to be locally adapted. So that's locally adapted inclusive education. And that is where the problem is. So if you look at Ghana's inclusive education policy, it recognizes a lot of diversity, but it's the interpretation or the application of these things that is usually problematic. Within the global education space also, there are those scholars who also think that it is a utopian idea if we think that every learner, every diversity that comes with every learner will be addressed. So you realize that people will say, but if we open up for this, can we cater for this? If we cater for Rastafarians, someone will say, I also believe in not wearing a particular school uniform. I'm in Motown. I don't want to wear a pre-second school uniform because I identify with. So whatever discussions that we have within the Ghanaian populace can be placed within specific context within the global. So that is that. The other bit also that shapes perspective, has to do with the history of Ghanaian politics. And I think there are people on the panel who may be better in explaining the colonial perspective, but I would want to look at it after independence, where there was a de-emphasis on issues of diversity in looking at a unitary state. So Nkrumah said, we are all one people. We are no longer Akans, Gans, and there will be, we won't be referring to people as strangers. With the issue of strangers, that's something we need to take note of. So after Nkrumah, so that was, so even if you look at Ghana's non-Ghanaian population during Nkrumah's time, you realize that we had a lot of migrants. Over the years, it's just, I think, 2.4% of Ghana's population. When the Busia administration was criticized for pursuing nativism and indigenousness, and that led to many people tagged as strangers. And we know in the informal Ghanaian setting, largely informal Ghanaian setting, asking people to produce official documentation to prove their Ghanaian citizenship. So that led to many people being sent away, and it had implications in the school. Although it's several years ago, since 1969, where that alien compliance law was pushed, there are still traces of these things in the Ghanaian setting, where people, regardless of how long they have lived in Ghana, are tagged as strangers. So there's this amorphous construction of who a Ghanaian is. So a Ghanaian has to speak in a certain way. A Ghanaian you need a certain identity. So I mean, during the elections, right, I saw a Chinese at a registration center. People said it was photoshopped, but for me, whether photoshopped or not, it tells a certain story where he was registering and everyone said, why are we allowing Chinese to register? We fail to forget that a Chinese can be legally, and he may be Chinese, but the way Ghanaians come abroad and they acquire other nationalities, they may have dual nationalities, or they may put their Ghanaian nationality aside, renounce their Ghanaian nationality, and take on, I mean, American or UK, an English nationality. That's the same way people, so perhaps the Chinese, I don't know, but it hardly occurs to us that, yes, he may look like a Chinese, but legally he may be Ghanaian. And for me, these are some of the issues. So we see a lot of these things being played out. So I think I think there are many other, but I think I'll leave it here, and then as the conversation goes, we will.
stranger in our midst, right? Which, it's outside of the education debate, but it does seep into the conversation, right? It's something that exists in society, and we see it manifesting in the way that educational institutions function as well. So I will want to get back to that later on. But what I want to do now is we have some videos that I want to play. And I also need to acknowledge that Elizabeth is back with us, and we are so excited because she's the only, on this panel, she's the only one who teaches at the senior high school level. So we're excited that she was having some technical difficulties, but she's back with us now. So after we play the video, we'll come back and we'll take some more opinions about this. So if you have our video ready.
I can't wear my hijab together with my uniform. So I can wear my hijab on the way. But exactly at the time I'm in front of my school, I have to take off the hijab because the school rules are saying no hijab. Any Muslim activities are suspended for now. Sometimes when I'm working with my colleagues and you see them holding these rosaries and stuff, and no one would even know I'm a Muslim, but sometimes I want to show I'm a Muslim, but I can't. The only thing that will make me show is my hijab, and I'm denied of that. So
why must you cover your hair? There are people who argue that maybe you cannot engage in activities of the school with your hijab.
When you wear your hijab, you can do whatever you want. You can go to sports. In my school, I'm in the Taekwondo club, and I wear my hijab because it's after school. I wear my hijab and I wear my PE kits. I can do my Taekwondo. I can run with my hijab. I can do any other exercises with my hijab. It doesn't prevent me from doing other things.
Great. So I want us to, just based on this video, and religious discrimination is something that this is very recent. This video we just showed is very recent, and so this is not from some distant past that kind of negates the relevance of the conversation. It's very recent, and it's something that we, when I say we, I'm talking about some of us in Ghana and even in the diaspora have talked about a lot about this idea, particularly for schools like, a lot of the schools in Ghana, I don't want to mention specific names, but a lot of the schools that are mission schools, right, or were mission schools, right, the excuse of saying that we are a Christian missionary institution and therefore we have the right, although we have also noticed that some of these rights are negated by the Constitution. These rights that they invoke, right, are negated by the Constitution itself. So Elizabeth is back. So I want Elizabeth to talk about, first of all, to give her initial opinions or perspectives about where these issues of inclusion, these ideas, particularly when we think about religion, disability, and as Nia and Daniel both talked about the ethnicity bit, and even the idea of foreignness. Where do they come from? If we still have Elizabeth, is she still with us? No, she's not. But when she comes back, I'm sure she will try to come back. We apologize for all of the technical difficulties. I promise we are not trying to set up a boys club here with an all-male panel. That is definitely not what we are trying to do. And so apologies for the technical difficulties we are having. But I want us to talk a little bit about the religion part of it, right? So we've talked about, we've mentioned the other things. We've mentioned the ethnicity. We've mentioned the issues with migration and immigrants and the stranger, right, in our midst. But do mission schools, and this wasn't part of the original question, but do mission schools like Presec that I went to, that some of us went to, Wesley Girls High School, Agri Memorial where Elizabeth teaches, schools that are, mission schools, right? Do they have the right, because of their Christian identity, to say, for instance, ignore the rights of Muslims or other religious minorities? Anyone? What is the What does that mean for inclusion and diversity when schools insist on these rights?
I mean, it's disheartening that we live in under a democracy, and it feels like every now and then we need to remind people that we're actually in a democracy, and under a democracy, people have rights, and these are rights that should be protected, enforced, and expanded. And it seems once you make that argument, you're tagged as some kind of Western liberal who doesn't understand the the up and downs of Ghana, right? But I think it's problematic to have a public school and to invite people from all walks of Ghanaian life within and outside to come to your school and then claim that you can't accommodate their backgrounds, right? You can't accommodate their religious differences. I find it abhorrent, and frankly speaking, let's call it what it is, right? It's just blatant Islamophobia that we see lurking throughout the society, right? You go to a church, and then when they are talking about Islam, they immediately associate it with terrorism, right? And you hear things like that, right? And so you have these prejudices that percolate around the society, and it's telling that some high schools don't have some of these draconian Islamophobic policies, and others do. Right. And so it clearly shows you that the Ghana Education Service is really not doing its job of providing clear anti-discriminatory guidelines for all public schools. And so depending on who is running the school at a particular point in time, they can institute any religiously motivated rule they want. Right. And so Wesley Girls, for example, bans the Quran, bans fasting, and then implements some draconian surveillance apparatus where students are actually observing other students, and when they don't eat, they get reported, And another school doesn't do that in the same Cape Coast, right? Another missionary school doesn't do that. So for me, it points to why does the Ghana Education Service not clearly mandate that you can't discriminate against students along religious lines? At first, I was convinced that it's just an oversight and it may be incompetence, but now I'm convinced that it's not. I think it's deliberate that they do not really provide clear guidelines, because it would mean that they are taking some power away from the missionary schools to enforce that sort of religious discipline, right? And so for them to clearly come out and say that, it would imply that they can't break those laws, right? Because the Constitution kind of is clear against them, right? The unfettered rights to express your religion are clearly there, right? And the unfettered rights to ensure that religion doesn't become the basis for excluding students' access to education are clearly there. So I'm convinced that, we cannot ignore the political, economic, social, and cultural power of the church in Ghana, and how it manifests in the way these rules kind of play out across various public schools. I remember when I was in university, you wake up at dawn and there's somebody preaching behind your window shouting, right? That's an inconvenience. That's an infringement of my right to have a good night's sleep and then wake up in the morning and go and learn, right? And I think all of those things can only happen because of the religious hegemony of the Christian church, right, across the society.
And Daniel, I saw you had I was looking at your face. You had some. It looks like you have thoughts. So what are you thinking?
So when he spoke about, preaching, then I remember when I go to Ghana and I sit in the church rows and I hear people. So I tell my friends the day a fetish priest will enter into the bus and then start pouring libation, everyone will run away. And that is when we'll realize how inconveniencing some of these things are. But then it will also tell us how biased the Ghanaian society, or just like any other society. I think I'm yet to see any society that applies rules without subjectivity. So it tells us there's a certain bias. So if a preacher enters the car, no matter how inconveniencing it is, we are more accommodating. But should a fetish priest enter into the bus, I'm sure he won't have it easy. Even when you look at the discussions and in terms of the Muslim girls not being allowed to fast, you realize that in terms of the reactions, we are a bit moderate in terms of how we say rules are rules. If you monitor the discussions, because I mean, we live with Muslims, we know them, we have many friends as them. So many of these things are social constructs, and that is the problem. So when it comes to the law, I'm not a lawyer, so I cannot speak to it. But when it comes to the social, so people, you realize, will be more accommodating of what they know. So I need spoke about expansion of these rules, and that is where usually the problem is. So you ask yourself, uh, why can't a Rastafarian do this? Why are we accommodating? Even if we discriminate, we go about it in a careful way and when we are speaking with a Muslim. Is it because we are more used to them? But for me, it shows us that schools can be either change agents, or they can be institutions that, I mean, perpetuate existing inequalities within society. And within the Ghanaian context, when it comes to issues of diversity, issues of inclusion, we tend to mirror the larger society. So when you talk about the Rastafarian not entering schools, for me, the issue is bigger than Achimota. How many formal institutions will give employment to, I mean, a Rastafarian? So what Motown is doing is reflecting, is mirroring just larger societal issues. With the issue of the religious institutions and their role, for me, I think there's more to do with issues of governance. So you'd ask yourself, I know in Presec, for the past 3-4 times, JJ Asai was a Presbyterian. The previous one was a Presbyterian. The current one I know is a Presbyterian. So if we say they are publicly funded school, why is it that in appointment of the head teachers, we don't go for just competence, but we add competence, and then we also will add. So it's a pseudo form of, so in terms of our school governance and detaching religious affiliations and convictions and norms, I think it's pseudo, where we say they are public schools, but in actual fact, in terms of the governance structure, they are not. Because in terms of even the chaplaincy in Presec, always a Presbyterian. So for me, in terms of our governance structure, we need to look at these things again. But then again, it lies in the definition of inclusion, where my position on these things is more about siding with scholars who believe that inclusion is not a goal achieved. It's an ever-evolving process. So it's always, for me, with the advent of social media and others, it's important that we keep having these conversations. We keep interrogating the issues. We shouldn't hope to arrive, but we should hope to make improvements in order to be more accommodating. At the same time, maintaining social cohesion, maintaining social order.
Great, and I want to, so thank you so much for these comments, both of you. And I see Amanda, and Elizabeth have joined us now. If you can hear me, I want to start our next question with either or both of you. So particularly Elizabeth, if you can hear me, what is the social? We keep having this conversation about, particularly when, and I remember I followed the conversation a little bit when the Rastafarian issue came up with Achimota School and all of that, and a lot of the conversation centered around we have to be uniform. We want sameness, right? And you mentioned that earlier on. What is the social benefit of uniformity or sameness as Ghanaians? Why do we want to be the same, particularly when we think about our schools? What is the value or benefit of wanting all students to be the same, dress the same? Maybe as a teacher, what are your perspectives on that? If you can hear me, Elizabeth. Maybe there's a lag. Hi, Elizabeth, can you hear me?
I can jump in, just to say something quickly as we wait for her to join back. So something that Dorothy in the Facebook, I think in the Facebook comments made a post there that I think is very relevant. And I was also thinking about that because thinking about is the religious groups, or for instance the mission schools, the name that are attached to, for instance, Presbyterian, Catholic, Presbyterian, whatever. I mean, is that just for ceremonial purposes, or actually who is paying for these schools? Because if Neil mentioned that, it seems to be arbitrary that a similar school in Cape Coast will not enforce that rule, or Wesley Girls will enforce that rule. So does it mean that maybe Wesley Girls is being funded by or has more contributions by the church more than this? Maybe, for instance, and this is not the case, but maybe Aggie Memorial. So I'm wondering how much does that maybe play a role in this, in the sense that who really sort of, because I know, I mean, the Ghana government doesn't really fund these public institutions as much. They don't really put much money into the public coffers. So in the end of the day, who actually has more say in these schools matter. And maybe is that driving the discrimination and the discrimination, because these are maybe I'm spoiled, maybe I'm a spoiled academic in the West, but these are blatant. Like, there isn't, this is not like don't bring sugar to campus or something. I mean, these are blatant discrimination. Telling somebody that they cannot fast during Ramadan and not making any accommodation for them. There is no there is no relativism here. So I don't know. It is driving me to think that perhaps there is a financial issue here, in which who really funds these schools needs to come into question, and how that is driving the inability of, for instance, the Ministry of Education to actually enforce these rules.
I think I don't know that, and I don't want to say anything that may not be factual. So I don't know the funding situation, but what I do know for sure is that these schools are under the Ghana Education Service. And per my understanding, and this is also something that baffles me, so it's in relation to what Godfrey was just saying, right? If all of these schools are under the Ghana Education Service, and once again, this is where Elizabeth would have, if she's connected, would have been really resourceful for us, because she is inside of this context. But if all of these schools are under the Ghana Education Service, so I remember when the Achimota School Rastafarian episode happened, the GAS said, allow them in, blah, 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 and the school said no. I'm like, how can the GAS say, let them in, and the school says no?
It doesn't make sense.
The school is under the GS. Something that baffles me. I don't understand all of this. Like, how can the GS say, okay, do this? They are the governing, overarching body, but the individual school will say, the GS has said we should do this, but we are not doing it, which is maybe part of the reason why the case is now in court. It's a little baffling to me, but I want to move on. And let's acknowledge the comments here as well. We have some good comments here. Thank you for all of your comments. And I think that I saw a couple. So we've addressed one. I think I saw a couple questions that we can address from the comments before we move on, or as we move on. Yes. So Francis says, does the anti-Islam stance also have to do with North-South relations, that the North is predominantly Muslim and poor, and the South is predominantly Christian and rich? What do we think? Is there a correlation between, this anti-Islam Muslim stance in our schools and that traditionally that divide between the North and the South, or these stereotypes that are perpetuated in society? What do we think? Or what do we know? And Elizabeth is back. Can you hear me, Elizabeth?
Yes, please.
Great. Thank you so much. So, so now that you're back and you can hear me, I wanted your take on the issue of why we want all students to be the same, to be uniform. What are the benefits of having all students? So, you should all look the same. You should all do these same things. What are the benefits of it as a teacher who's been around students for the last 10 years?
Okay, we do so just so the students will have a kind of a level playing field. They are not mature, so they need an environment where they will feel that irrespective of their backgrounds, wherever they are coming from, okay, they have the same opportunity to do whatever they are supposed to do in terms of achieving their academic goals. With the issue of uniforms, as in the dress code, that people who can afford expensive stuff, and those people from less privileged times, it affects them because of the kinds of things other students bring and all that. So I feel that all these things are done with the issue of uniform, boarding house, and every other thing that is done. It's, a part of measures put in place to make sure that the young adults have a conducive environment to achieve their academic goals without that unnecessary competition and all that.
So let me push a little bit, Elizabeth, and ask the question about, and since this is recent, right? This has been in the conversation about the hair, right? Whether it's a boy or a girl, is the hair part of the uniform sameness conversation, or are there what are the instances where maybe they would be given an excuse or an exception, and all of that?
From without mentioning where I teach, some of the girls are supposed to maintain a low haircut, but then the exceptions are given to people with medical problems, and they will have to show for it the reason why they should be given exception as to they should wear a longer hairstyle. And some people have been given that opportunity. That of the boys, all of them wear the low haircut. But for girls, depending on your background as in the area of your health, some people, they come with all manner of excuses saying that they should be allowed to wear their hair long because if they cut it affect hair, you have eye and all that. So in our case, we allow them young if you have something to prove. Indeed, you should be given that opportunity.
So there are definitely exceptions based on what case you can make for yourself. So in this case, would for instance a Muslim girl or woman or a Rastafarian be able to make a case that for religious reasons I want an exception? Or how does that work with the exceptions that are given in the schools? I don't know if you could. Okay. Oh, it looks like we are breaking up again. Can you hear us, Elizabeth?
A boy with locks. Yes, please.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, you were breaking. I think we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. I said that for the number of years I have been there, it's only this year that we've accepted a gentleman with locks, Rastafarian, as you'd want to call them. Muslims do not wear, then they have a place of worship. And during fasting period, Ramadan, things are made for them where food. Details of, so they have, so anytime there's Ramadan, the
looks like we're still having issues with Elizabeth, but we'll go on, and I'm sure she'll try to come back. And when she comes back, we'll, like I said, because she's the one who, you know, is more inside of this particular context that we're talking about. A lot of this conversation centers around recent news stories that all have to do with senior high school. So her input is very important to this conversation. But I want us to, so yes, a few of the comments. Nanama says, sameness doesn't exist, but authorities try hard to push this narrative. It's part of the reason Ghanaians are so intolerant. We are taught that being different means there's something inherently wrong with you. So,
can I say something on that? Because I think that's a very powerful quote, comment that needs to be sort of, you know, given as much volume. If I had a way to sort of fund this comment a little bit more, I would. Because I think maybe we might get to the colonial question, but I think part of the colonial process was to give us a monolithic identity, that somehow we had to be one person. And I think part of even the boarding school system, which we have to acknowledge, that the boarding school system was one way to craft that identity. So maybe part of having the difficulty with thinking about difference is that we've been socialized even through colonialism up, you know, to accept the fact that there is just this one African, there's just one identity, there's just one Ghanaian, which really didn't exist, you know, prior to that. I mean, we had several different ethnicities and groups, and it's not crazy to think that even in such diversity, we had various fights and arguments here and there, but still there was some sort of social fluidity. So I think we have to really come to understand that we live in a country which the borders of it were created by somebody who's in Germany. I mean, countries in Europe, and it was done in Germany. So I think we need to come to that realization and also really emphasize the fact that, we live in a country of difference, race, gender, sexuality, and I don't think that has really been achieved in our current educational system, especially with the way that we talk about the boarding school system, and even there as well.
Great, and let me acknowledge. Thank you for that comment. Let me acknowledge that Amanda is here. Amanda, our regular co-host, is here. Audio only too. So if you can hear me, and if you want to chip in, wait, is she still here? I think she's still here, right? I know she was here. No, she's not here right now. But I want us to go ahead and play. If we can play the Carbonu video about this conversation about uniformity, because I think it's important to have this conversation if we ever want to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
There are people who are born blind. There are people who are born deaf. There are people who are born handicapped. Is that not so? Good. Are there no institutions for them? Are there not institutions for all these people? The Gawulomo will not wear shoe when he is in his white calico. True or not true? The Gawulomo, the Huno in the Volta region, the Komfo in Ashanti region, they dress in a particular way. Is that not true? If all these people come to a school and want to manifest their religions, what are you going to do? I mean, I don't even know why the Rastafarians don't have their own schools. I don't even know, because they've been in this country for a very long time.
Initial thoughts on this, particularly because I think it has something very important, and this is not just anybody, right? This is the president of the Ghana National Association of Teachers, right? Ghana National Association of Teachers. So this is not just any ordinary Ghanaian voicing their opinion on this issue. And so that makes it a very powerful stance. And I also do know that there are people who echo these views. And so what do we say to something like that? In my opinion, I feel like when you bring up some of these things, we call false equivalencies, right? When we say, we need to do this, and then you are bringing an equivalent situation that is absolutely has nothing to do with it, right? But I don't want to be the one whose opinions matter here. I want to bring our guests in. Daniel or Ni, what do you think about that video? What are your views on that?
I mean, Mr. Kabu is not my favorite person in education. I think it's such a weird comment to make when you live in such a multicultural society, where essentially what Mr. Kabuni is arguing for is segregation of people based on their religious beliefs. So Rastafarians should go and create their schools, right? People who practice in various indigenous religious beliefs should go and create their school. Christians should go and create their schools. The reason why folks like him can say the things he says is because we have elite schools that are essentially Christian in nature, right? And access to those schools grants you certain status and privileges, right? So you went to Presec, you went to Infancy Pim, you went to Wesley Girls, you went to, right? The social networks that you can create with that sort of status and connections and social network are important, right? And so for him, it's fine so far as it's Christians who are getting that social capital that comes from these connections they can nurture and create with these institutional affiliations. So all of you can go and create your schools and segregate yourselves, but that doesn't make sense in a society that is democratic, where you have public institutions, right? The importance of these public institutions are to create this nurturing ground so that students learn and understand difference, right? Why are you going to teach somebody not to have stereotypes about people who have locks and then automatically associate them with people who smoke weed, right? And then automatically criminalize people who smoke weed? If you think about it, when we watch a lot of Ghanaian films, how do we signal that a person is bad? They smoke cigarettes, they drink alcohol, right? So we live in this very prejudiced society where these markers are already associated with particular types of behavior, and you reproduce it in a system where you segregate people up. But I think fundamentally, what kind of underscores this idea is also a pedagogical kind of thinking, a teaching philosophy that says students are empty heads, right? So that's on the one hand. I think there's a teaching philosophy where it's like we are the teachers, we have all the knowledge, and then we dump that information on the students in their heads, right? And I think underlying that further is a moral panic, an anxiety about young people, right? If you think about it, there's an anxiety about young people and what young people are doing. People are scared of young people. At some point in time, people were referring to unemployed or underemployed young people as security threats, which is really crazy if you think, like, it doesn't make any sense to think about it in that sense. So I think there's a fundamental underlying kind of moral anxiety about what young people are doing. And I think it really has to be mapped onto various avenues of expression that young people have available to them now. So if you think about it, you have more young people engaging in public conversations via social media, right? And so we are knowing what young people are thinking about, right? They are making songs, making music, critiquing the government, critiquing people, talking about sex and sexuality in all these complex ways. And I think older Ghanaians are scared, right? They immediately read that as a threat, as something indecent, as something abhorrent, right? And so we need to check and discipline these young people, get them to conform so that they don't transgress our conservative moral kind of boundaries, which is always full, right? It's always a false sort of moral fabric. So I really wanted to center that moral anxiety around young people and really let us seeing that as the foundation for some of these anxieties.
Great, thank you. So Daniel, what are your thoughts on that? You're muted.
Am I still muted?
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of these pedagogical arguments, this is where we call a teacher-centered learning, where, but I mean, in terms of education discourse, it should rather be learner-centered, where we respond to the diverse needs of the learners. So it is teacher-centered, where there's something called the banking, where, as he said, the school is a place where you have to take a certain idea, and it's only learning some specific things. That is what will take you to the next level. So that is some sort of thing that that's what I get from what Angel Carbono is saying. And then we should also look at the issue of agency and the way children are portrayed within our society. So in all this, you ask yourself, with the Motown, with the PTA, they said the rules, I think, has been reviewed. So that was 2020. So that's a recent thing. So it's not something as far back as we would say, oh, they've not reviewed the rules. So it shows you that's what people think. That is what parents who are stakeholders also within the educational system, that's what they think. But in all this, I do ask myself, as a student of education, did students have any input in the new rules? Because for me, that's also very important, because at the end of the day, in as much as they have they have some kind of limitations in terms of their capacity, I don't think we should deny them of any agency, because especially at their age, people who are going to the university, we cannot think perhaps from 17 to 18, then all of a sudden, then they become superheroes. So it's also the way we see children. Children have been portrayed as people lacking agency, a lot of passivity. So we have to think for them. But I think education has moved to the point where we have to think with them. And so it is not, so usually I'm not of the extreme ends where allow them to do what they want. I also don't believe in impose whatever you think on them. I think we should, have a discussion with them to also, at least, even if we are those who cast the ballot, we need to know what they also think about, because in the end, these rules are for them. And we should also know that because these things are all social constructs, there's a bit of there's a lack of distinct. These things do move. So if you don't have the input of the students, who are also key stakeholders in this whole thing, we may be missing the point. And one thing I also want to draw attention to, in all this, we realize that the PTA has spoken with Achimota issue. The PTA has spoken, the Old Boys Association, Reverend IT has spoken, but they are not those who took the decision. Achimota School took the decision. The question is, with all this publicity they are getting, do they not care? Before the issue went to court, did they not care? They should at least come out to tell us. If, for me, even if I agree with what Achimota is doing, I may have I will withdraw, because they are not even bold enough to come out to say, we are not accepting these guys because of A, B, C, and D reasons. Because when they if you are confident what you did is good, put the reasons out there and let us interrogate it. But then what they reduce us to is we do pure conjecture. We are assuming they did it because of A, B, C, D. Wesley girls and the Muslim girls. If you think what you are doing in terms of discipline, put it out there. Let's not hide, and then other people will do the speaking, and then we'll be like people have turned the discussion in another way. Put the discussions there. The Muslim girls will also put, the family will come out. That is the only way we can make progress. But if these schools who these things are taking these decisions are not coming out to explicitly tell us why they may or they may not allow some of these things, then they leave us to just conjecture. And I think it doesn't help, because for me, in the end, it is not about what I believe in. It's not about my ideology or my view about education or I mean, politics or any other thing. For me, it's about the future of people. In education, when we say education for all, we mean it in its literal sense. Education, not just for a group of people, but for everyone. Everyone, every learner matters and matters equally.
Thank you. And I really like the idea, the stakeholder idea, right? The stakeholder approach to education. And I think that it's something that Ghana should take very seriously. The idea that, we should move away from the idea that students are empty vessels, that when they go to school, we have to fill these vessels, right? That it's a very dangerous, first of all. And I always laugh when I see posts on social media or have conversations with people, and they are applauding maybe somebody somewhere, usually outside Ghana, somebody who is like 21 years old, 22 years old, has gone on to do really great things, and then we applaud them. And I laugh because I think about, well, we live in an educational ecosystem where we treat students like the students have nothing to contribute to their own education, right? And it is very dangerous. So I like the idea, the stakeholder approach, recognizing that students, as much as parents, as much as the state, as much as the administration of the school, as much as the communities that they are in, are stakeholders in their own education. And they should be allowed to make the necessary input. Of course, a lot of these students are young and they need some direction, guidance, and so on. That's not what we are arguing. But to be able to more and more allow the students to bring themselves, to bring their experiences, their uniqueness into their own learning. I think that is very important. We have to have a national conversation about how to do that, right? And I think it's also the reason why we haven't gotten there. We already talked about this. The reason why we haven't gotten to that point is because we are still insisting on sameness and uniformity, which is I know Amanda is here. Amanda, if you can hear me, and if you have any thoughts, and if you want to join it, coming with your thoughts, we will be very grateful. Elizabeth got cut off again. But I want to move on because of time. I want to skip and move on because I don't want us to just sit here and complain. But I want to move on to a conversation about what civil society can do, right? So, what can we do? When I say civil society, once again, the idea of stakeholders, right? The communities, the state, the schools, ordinary people. What role do we have a role at all? And if we do have a role, what role do we have in shaping these issues of inclusion and marginalization in our schools? Nee, you can go ahead.
Okay. I am very wary when we say civil society, because I like to really pinpoint what we are talking about, right? So we have the think tanks, right? And then we have the NGOs who are engaged in various educational sort of reform and policy and research and stuff like that. I know Kofi Asare, for example, has been very vocal on education matters. So there's on that level, right? This aggregate what we are talking about. I think some of them are doing a wonderful job in terms of providing us with the research to really understand what's going on in the schools. For example, GS should be releasing an annual report just telling us how many discriminatory incidents happened in the schools, right? So maybe 20 students were sacked for on religious grounds, right? 10 students were denied. We should be getting that sort of those kind of reports from the schools. And I think some of the the CSOs are doing that sort of work, right? Providing data as what's going on in the schools. So I appreciate that because that allows us to understand the extent of the problem. Largely, I think when we are able to really grasp what's happening in other schools, across the country, I think we can really understand what's going on. For now, it seems like discrimination is an invisible canker that is kind of permeating all aspects of educational life, and it's hardly addressed, right? It's hardly addressed. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, I believe that those of us who belong to groups like the Odadiers, Old Achimotans, and so and so and so, you can clearly see the power of old alumni groups in the affairs of the school. And so you clearly saw how some old Achimotans came out in defense of their school, right, in the name of discipline. They were like, I went to Achimota, I was disciplined this way, and I think it's the best training, etc. So we have to be also very vocal in our own student associations, right, because we have some power. I mean, I will tell you, for example, that as an Odadie, I get very upset when particular figures are elevated in our conversation about this is an Odadie, and this Odadie is particularly homophobic, and it has religious bigoted perspectives, and they're constantly being put on a pedestal as their ultimate, So I think, and I have failed on my part of not being very vocal within my association, but I think for some of us, we can also do that sort of work within our old student associations and force the conversation and force, our association to really recognize how this impacts students present and past, and how we need to do better in terms of allowing for a more inclusive educational environment that really respects diversity, right, and really sees it as a potential for growth, development, training of the students, etc.
Thank you. Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, I think what we've started is good. I mean, at least we are engaging people like me. I would hardly want to engage in some of these things. So, I mean, getting people like me also I need to do more of that. I mean, on the personal level, I need to do more of that as a student of education. I need to engage more people. I think that's also one bit. The other side also is I think we should also, in terms of acknowledging differences, what I see in a lot of these discussions is you have people who are saying these people are not doing, they don't know what they are doing. Then the others are saying, no, these people, they are not. So we always have people on extreme sides. But I keep saying that to what end? I mean, is it to win an argument or to make sure that the one who we are discussing the best, what is in the best of interest? I mean, there are stuff where it could be my brother, he could be my sister's son, he could be my friends. So it should not only be when it is far away. So for me, I may disagree with you based on my positionality, but I will also try to understand where you are coming from. How can we engage? In the end, you may not be able to convince me, but at least we should make the effort to engage. I keep saying, because these things are social constructs, it will not be as if we'll reach a position where this is the destination, we have arrived. We need to constantly engage. The other bit is when you see parliamentarians, many spoke against, some spoke for. I mean, issues of inclusion and issues of diversity. What are they doing? When they push for law, the schools cannot go against the laws of Ghana. So for us, people like us as academics, we may write, we may engage, we may agree to disagree. But there are people who can really do something. People have taken some aspects of it to the court. But some also are parliamentarians. What are they doing about it? Do they just, argue on the floor of parliament and that is all? I mean, we need to elevate the conversations. We need to move a step higher. And the other bit is when it comes to inclusion in Ghana, we tend to focus more on academic inclusion. So if it's about letting the students study, so a teacher has put a student at the back of the class. Everyone comes out. No, why will you do that? That is discrimination. So that is also a part of the problem. And in terms of professionals, they need training, they need retraining, and to be up to date with modern ways of thinking outside the box about how to deal with these issues of diversity. Because as I said, we will not get to a final destination. Issues will come up, new identities will come up. People will always challenge the status quo. It is not to say rules are rules, so we've closed the conversation. I may disagree with you, but I should be able to hear you out.
One of the things that that has been around with us for as long as we have been around. When I say we, as a country, as humanity, disability, right? And I don't want us to. I know we've mentioned it in passing. I don't want us to end this conversation without having any sustained conversation about disability and why it is that we tend to segregate disabled people, or even when they are in the same spaces in schools, we are like, well, you are here, so fend for yourself, right? That we don't and I want us to show this video here, and when we come back, I want us to talk a little bit for a couple minutes about disability as one of the issues about diversity and inclusion in our schools.
10-year-old Herman was born with cerebral palsy. According to his mother, Mavis Yomiotio, doctors told her that her son would not be able to perform basic tasks like his age mates. Despite this hard truth told to Mavis, she remained a strong tower of support. The doctor told me because of Herman's condition, he would not develop early like other children, and this will affect his movement, speech, and other activities. I accepted this and never stopped praying to God. Today, it is this support that has pushed Herman to climb the educational ladder. He's among the 122 males writing this year's BEC at the La St. Paul's Business School.
So I want us to talk about, as we are talking about diversity and inclusion. Disability has been with us for a long time, and we have Ghana School for the Blind and so on and so forth. There's been efforts, right? But my question is, are the efforts at helping disabled, and disabled is on all different angles, varieties of it, and spectrum, and so on. But if we were to generally have a conversation about disability in our schools, are we doing enough? And what could we be doing? When I say we, institutions, governments, and civil society, what could we be doing about disability as a very crucial aspect of inclusion issues?
Yeah. Before I answer that, there was something I forgot to mention when I was answering the last question. It kind of tied back to this question, which is that the students themselves also advocate for themselves. In fact, I was doing a study looking at news on protests in Ghana. And one of the things that struck me was how many student protests in high schools happened. I saw so many stories about students going on protest and protesting one thing or the other. And for me, it really displayed something that the students wanted to be heard. And there was a mechanism in the schools that prevented the students from being heard. The number of stories about student protests that I saw in high school specifically really shocked me. It's more than the universities, right? The universities were doing cocoa compared to what the teens were doing in terms of making sure that their voices are heard. So I wanted to just point out that the students are also advocating for themselves, right? And ensuring that the school is responsive to their needs. Okay. So I just wanted to drop that so that I don't forget. I think when it comes to the question of disability, we just need to look at Ghana, right? We just need to look at our cities. We just need to look at the way we invisibilize people who are disabled, the way we construct systems and structures and infrastructure in such a way that we really disable people from accessing, education and other resources. So clearly you could see that the student came in a taxi, right? Imagine trying to get on a trotro, right? So if we think about it, there's the question of it becomes so difficult for the student to even move from point A to point B to get to school, right? Because we have a society that just is so ableist. We do not care, right? You have open gutters everywhere, right? You have undulating um, footpaths, right? In terms of the bricks, you can easily trip, right? Somebody who has a problem with walking and uses a walking stick, etc., could easily trip on footpath and so on. We construct schools also in such a way that we don't even care about who's attending, who might have physical impairments and they may not be able to get up and down a staircase. We don't care about these things, right? And part of the argument people can make is that it's a matter of cost, right? We don't have the resources, but that's always the easy way out, right? We are still building schools like we're building schools 20, 30 years ago, right? When we are actually trying to implement an inclusive education policy, especially around disability. It started in 2015, I believe, and it's supposed to be there are a series of implementations till 2019. So there's actually a document, and I know Daniel can speak to this better than I do. But that's the thing, right? And then you also have the cultural stigma of people with disabilities, right? And so somebody might have a disability which is invisible, right? And they may manifest it occasionally, right, in particular ways. And then people immediately associate that with a stigma of a curse, etc. So then you have that social cultural thing to also overcome. Then you have the media, right? Look at the story we just watched. It wasn't a story about how is the school not catering to the needs of the students. It's rather look at all the adversity the student has overcome, right? And so then you erase the structural inhibitions, right? The structural constraints that don't enable students to actively participate. And who was helping the student? It was another student who was carrying the young Herman, right? And so where are the resources in the schools, the school nurses, where are those people who would help students, right, and ensure that they are able to access and engage in education just like every other student there as well, right? Even the desks, how are the desks constructed? I'm really focusing on infrastructure because it is such a disabling component of just navigating everyday life in Ghana. Some of you may have elderly parents, right? Your parents, essentially, who may be above 60 or 70, will find it very difficult to walk around Ghana. They will fall down and hurt themselves, right? And I think it's just the mentality of this ableist sort of mentality that we haven't really addressed. We don't even think about people with disabilities, right? We don't even think about the learning disabilities. I remember in school when you get a question wrong, you are caned and beaten, right? Nobody will come to you and find out exactly why you are struggling to understand maths. Maybe you may have a learning disability with maths. Maybe you may be dyslexic, right? All those things don't seem to factor in very much, especially when I was growing up, right? In the way I kind of engage with the educational system. And so I'm going to end here because I know Daniel has more to say.
Yeah, Daniel, what are you thinking? I saw you were taking notes or writing stuff down.
When he said about mathematics being cane, dyslexic, and other things, people know that they process things differently. So you have people here, they are slow starters, but then they pick up. And there are people even in Ghana we started school with. I mean, there are people you classify as they were not too good. But I mean, if you look at how when we all exited the educational, I mean, they were wonderful. They did wonderfully well. And then when he said he will be caned, I mean, we tend to have a certain idea about discipline. I mean, me inclusive. So then when people say that you want Montessori training, you see, if they beat you, if they whip you, I mean, you will sit up. So we tend to think of discipline in a certain way. We think of discipline only when people perhaps don't talk back. So, yes, sir, that is what we consider as discipline. We don't think it is discipline when I say, perhaps I'm not doing well, then you're barking. I'm like, oh, I didn't understand it this way. It will be viewed as talking back. And for me, that is why we need to look at issues of agency again. Then again, the argument is not about allowing children to do just as they please, but it's about engaging them and knowing that they are also stakeholders. The bit about inclusive education, when you look at the inclusive education document, I mean, all the kind of special need that was played in there is captured in the physical impairment, motor and mobility impairment, including cerebral palsy, autism. I mean, all these things are captured in the document, but it's just fine English packaged in a document. No one cares about it. And for me, it's not as if you look at the people who have managed our education over the years, these are people who we cannot say are not exposed. These people are very much exposed. They are solid academics, if not academics, professionals who know a lot about these things. They are well traveled, so they know how it is done. I mean, in the best case scenarios. But it looks like in Ghana, if there's no imminent threat of a politician losing election, we don't care. Because I'm sure with these issues, if it was perhaps election time and there was an imminent threat that people with special needs will vote against a particular government and it will affect their fortunes, I am sure we will be having a different conversation now. So we can speak, we can say all we can, but politicians, I mean, are those with there are reasons why we pay taxes. There are reasons why people are voted into power. Governance is not, I mean, something we should play about. I will not sit here and pretend as if I have all the solutions. But when you offer yourself, or when you accept to become Minister of Education, Deputy Minister of Education, Chief Director of Education, you should have solutions. But we tend to allow our politicians to get away with many of these things. So as Nikwe said, we are talking about the struggle. I mean, he's hardworking. He's really determined. So that's the narrative we are creating. Your ability, when people have to do their work, instead of us taking them on, we tend to rather change the narrative and look at how beyond how people have failed to provide the basic needs, you have struggled. So even it shows how we even construct hard work within our society. That's why I keep saying that in the end, the schools are just mirroring larger societal issues. And in terms of education, we talk about issues of access, but then the other bit also is issues of acceptability, where stakeholders need to accept whatever. So we realize that people beyond the school don't accept these things, and that is why these inequalities continue to persist within our societies, and we need to do more.
Great. So your one of your final thoughts reminded me of a recent conversation I had about resilience, and a really smart person told me we should stop glamorizing resilience and start attacking the structural issues, the structural failures that have necessitated that resilience, right? That we keep talking about. I mean, I'm not bashing the radio station. Of course, we could bash them, or the TV stations that review or highlight some of these resilient stories and so on. But I think the focus, just like we've all said, the focus should shift away from glamorizing that resilience and shift towards why are we failing these students, right? I have one final question. We are out of time, but I want to read a couple of the comments that we have before the final question here. So Francis said, we are all different and what we need is tolerance. If I live in the Zongos, I'm still a human being. If I'm Muslim, I'm still human. So how do we create an inclusive environment where everyone would consider themselves valued in the school system? How to best empower students, especially those from socially marginalized backgrounds, to speak for themselves? I feel like we've, implicitly addressed several aspects of this, and I think that and then we may be able to address this, or some of the questions in here in this really loaded comment. Thank you, Francis. With the final question I want to ask, and this is in the spirit of not having a talk shop where we discuss problems and walk away. So what are some of the questions that we could ask, or we should ask, that might help transform this educational system that, based on this conversation and all of the examples around that, is fraught with challenges? What questions should we be asking of the system to help transform education in Ghana? And Godfrey, yes, we've been quiet, so if you want to chime in.
Right. There's a question. This question also pertains to something that I have been talking about here in the U.S. As well. And perhaps maybe the question here is, maybe from my perspective, it's more of a philosophical question. Like, why are we educating people in Ghana? Maybe that question needs to be rethought. Like, what is the essence of education? And that question, I think, is a very important question in our contemporary era, where there is fleeting resources. There's always the very easy response: we don't have money. Making it sound like everything entails money. But I think that part of the question is very important, because, if we're just educating people to get jobs, now there are people, these same companies can also train these people. So the question of what is the use of a university, what's the use of education, I think, in our era, where is it just about training people? Is it just about going to school to learn information, taking information and just go to work? Is that the kind of people that we want to, our future, as a country? So I think, for me, those important questions will drive the kinds of programs that is needed. Those larger philosophical questions can really inform with programs why we think somebody with the Rastafarian, who is Rastafarian or a Muslim, cannot even partake in their own religious, performances or behaviors in a high school. And I think these larger philosophical questions are important. We've not had them in a very long time. At least I'm not in that circle, so I'm not really seeing them. It's just about the doing. But is there a larger philosophical question that needs to be had in order to help us rethink why we are educating students in Ghana?
Great, thank you.
And maybe the response to that is not, the response to that is not educating people, and maybe that's what I want to say. We're not educating people just to get jobs. I think that is my really big pet peeve right now with the way we conceptualize the role of education everywhere. We're not just educating people to get jobs, because you can just be training anyone to get a job, but to be able to think critically, right? That's very, very important, to be able to analyze what happened to all these larger concepts, to be able to understand yourself as a citizen. Who are you? There's so many other very, very important things that we can think about. Yes, getting a job is important, but is that it? I think, and you can do that as well. So,
not to talk of the fact that, in Ghana, where are the jobs? So if you're educating to get for people to get the jobs that already exist, then you're already failing, right? But to your point, that if we go deeper into why are we educating, of course jobs are important, but in an economy where the jobs themselves don't exist, right? For thousands, tens of thousands of students who are coming out of the system every year, these jobs don't exist, right? So that would already be a failure. But if we, for instance, were to educate so that we can create value, not just financial, economic value, but social value as well, right? Where people can think creatively about making the jobs themselves, creating industries that already don't exist, industries that are not just economically important, but also socially important, right? How to think about problems, things like that. I think, just to add to that, are very important things. But any other comments about that? What questions should we be asking of our educational system?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Godfred's point about is this instrumentalist sort of approach to education, right? Where I remember people say let the industry kind of decide what we teach students, and that doesn't make any sense to me, because then they'll gut all the history programs, they'll gut all the all the languages, they'll gut all those social humanities classes that they find are not instrumental to learning how to create a hammer, right? They don't think students should understand their history, right? Where they come from and their sense of self. And I think that largely drives a lot of the education to the point where, for example, you have, I remember during the first term of the NPP administration, they had entrepreneurship classes for high school students. And I was like, what the hell? Why that? Why that at that particular point in time, right? For me, I think the larger question, I agree with Godfred's point, and I just want to add that there needs to be a sense of really understanding where we are to. With regards to, I think part of our thinking is too much shaped by this development kind of paradigm, right? And so every question is kind of, there's an anxiety about how do we get developed? And that kind of frames everything. And I think that is wrong, right? I think the question we should be asking is, how do we use education for liberation? I think development is old and tired. It doesn't make sense anymore, right? We've tried development for over how many decades now, right? We've changed our economy, we've liberalized and done all those things, and it's still not working, right? What we need to do is ask the question of liberation, which Kwame Nkrumah began. Kwame Nkrumah and all the traders in Mokola, all the women who contributed to the anti-colonial struggle started asking that question, right? How do we liberate ourselves? And I think for me, that's what Ghanaian education should really be asking, right? How do we liberate ourselves, right? Liberate ourselves from oppressive thinking, liberate ourselves from oppressive relationships with different parts of the world, liberate ourselves in terms of gaining the freedom to think and explore, right, our social context. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel, do you have any final thoughts on that?
I think he spoke about an instrumentalist view of education. I think in terms of education, we tend to look at it from a functionalist point of view, where we think education needs to serve the interest of society through the development of skills and others. So that's how we think education should function. But usually when you realize that when it comes to rules, then we just look at it from a social point of view. So we should these rules should maintain order, should maintain a certain identity. So I think for me, because societies or schools mirror what is happening within the larger society, the question I ask is, what kind of society are we? And then once we begin answering whether are we a moderate communitarianism in terms of society, where we think we balance individual rights and societal rights, but we think in the end the societal rights are supreme, or we are the extreme of the liberal end, where we think individual rights reign supreme over these things. For me, in all these things, I don't have a specific position on all these things. I pick it on case by case basis, because I don't think there's any society practicing these things to the extreme. So when it's the issue about the Rastafarianism, we would want to apply all the ideas about what education should be and the different rules, the relational rules, the etiquette rules, the structural rules. We apply it. Where does it fall? What does it seek to achieve? If it makes sense, I agree. If it doesn't, I disagree. And for me, that is what I want us to look at. So what kind of society are we?
Thank you so much. And just to make sure I understand, well, kind of combining both of your points and Gottfried before you, the idea that we need to probe where we are going. We need to have that conversation, right, in our educational system about what do we want to achieve here. And I think that it seems to me, based on all the news that is coming out and all of the interactions with students and so on, that we are on this in a path of inertia, right? That things have been happening like this. Let's just allow it to happen the way it's been happening the last 40 years, right? And so you can go back, apart from the number of students or the size of the school and so on, the only thing that has changed from my father's time to my time, and even my time, it's been a while now, right? We're getting older. It is the only thing that's changed is the number of students, right? My father will tell me these same things were happening, but then the school was a smaller school because there was, so the only thing that has changed is the population, right? But the same way of thinking about education, the same way of thinking about things like discipline and so on. And I think that is one thing, just from all of what you've said, we should be asking introspective questions like, what is the value? Why are we doing the things that we are doing, right, in our educational system? So thank you so much. And I also want to thank all of our viewers for all the wonderful comments and for viewing, even if you did not comment and if you watched us. We appreciate your time. We appreciate taking time out of your Sunday to join this conversation. We always like that. We have the questions and the comments that, so even if we're not able to read your comments, rest assured that we saw them. We only try to read a few of them because of time. Once again, I want to thank our guests, Danielle, Nee, and Elizabeth, who was not able to rejoin us, unfortunately, for technical reasons. Thank you so much. We will see you next time when we bring you yet another episode in this series of education. Thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your evening.